This is RedPubPod, a podcast from Redhawk Publications.
RedPubPod. Thank you.
This is RedPubPod. I'm Richard Eller. You know, there's a lot of experiences in life that people have, but some folks just have, more of them and bigger experiences. And luckily, we've got a book that we have published in the not too distant past that details how one individual who now lives in the area has enjoyed life and all the many facets between doing things for yourself, but also leading people on some of those extraordinary journeys. Rhodney Honeycutt joins us today, and his book is Long Guns and Great Fishing Runs. Did I get that right?
You got it exactly right, Richard.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Now, tell me how you got started with all of these exploits that you detail in the book. And we could talk about this for weeks, but we're going to try to, in the next half hour or so, cover just the basics to pique folks' interest in why the book might be the thing for them to kind of vicariously live through some of your exploits.
Well, Richard, the book starts, chapter 1, for example. It's entitled The Beginning, and that involves memories of mine as a very young child, the youngest being having my diaper changed in a field of tall grass, and taking my first my first rabbit at age 4 and first squirrel at 6. My grandparents were very instrumental in introducing me to the outdoors, both fishing and hunting. And chapter 1 ends with me passing that on to my children and now my grandchildren. So then the book goes from there into hunting and fishing expeditions with some very colorful people as well as just some good local friends.
Now, how did you make that transition from doing it for yourself to leading people?
Well, back when I was in my 30s and maybe even part of my 40s, I had a bucket list of certain species that I wanted to hunt or catch and certain sizes that I wanted to achieve. And once I achieved most of those goals, then it became more fun to introduce other people to the outdoors, both hunting and fishing. I mean, I've taken some very large brown bears, black bears, an 800-pound marlin, the first person from North Carolina at age 15 to earn a check at a bass tournament in 1968. And all that's water under the dam, but I still have my health and I have the desire to share the outdoors with other people, especially young people.
Now, is this one of the ways you've decided to do it is through your book?
Actually, the book came about, and by the way, I enjoyed working with you and Robert and Patty and creating this book. It was a long process, but at the end, it was well worth it, and I want to thank you folks. Yes, the book came about. I had a little bit of a health scare several years ago. I had 3 melanomas simultaneously, and that cannot be a good situation. 1's bad enough, but 3 is triple the problem. And you can Google Lake Norman 1970 with Rhodney Honeycutt and see why I had those melanomas. Back then, we fished from daylight to dark. We didn't wear hats. We didn't wear sunglasses. We didn't wear shirts. There was no sunscreen. But anyway, I paid the price for that. But anyway, on the way home from the doctor's appointment, my wife asked me to write down my outdoor hunting and fishing adventures. And that's how I got started, and the rest is history.
Really?
Yes.
So she kind of, I guess you were thinking about it anyway, but she sort of spurred the idea of just getting it down on paper so you could share it.
Well, I really hadn't even thought about it until I realized that I may have some health issues that could take me away from this world. And then I got to thinking about a lot of my children don't know a lot of the stories that I've experienced. They didn't know about the 1,000-pound grizzly bear in the tent or the black bear cubs in the tree with me or in the cave with a mountain lion. There's just a lot of experiences that I wanted to get on paper. And once I started writing, it just all came naturally. It just took a couple years to do it.
And not only the words, but you've got a lot of pictures in this thing too, right?
I think there's close to 600 pictures, and they pretty well tell a story in themselves.
Now, you've told us about chapter 1. Take us through the rest of the book. What would we expect, or what would we see if we open the book?
Well, Richard, after chapter 1, we jump forward to chapter 2, which is entitled Big Whitetails and Black Bears, and that's doing a lot of whitetail deer hunting in not only North Carolina but South Texas, Saskatchewan, Alberta, bear hunting in Saskatchewan and also in Alaska. Got some colorful people in that chapter, among them being Dale Earnhardt. I fished with him once, but I hunted with him on 18 hunts in South Texas. And then you jump on chapter 3, which is entitled Bird Hunting. And bird hunting or wing shooting is not my forte, but I've done some of it and I've enjoyed it. Been in some very special places. And chapter 4 on to Africa. That's a special experience. That is my wife and 2 daughters and I making 3 trips to Africa. And also in that chapter, and I won't spoil it, but there is the reason why in the middle of a dark night in Africa at 2 o'clock in the morning that I stopped hunting, and I haven't hunted since. And I'll let you read the book to find out why that's the case. But then we go on to chapter 5, which is a cat in a cave, and I was on a mountain lion hunt in British Columbia, and the outfitter that I was hunting with is also the game control agent for that area of the territory, and he got a call about 4 o'clock in the morning that there was a mountain lion had been sighted the evening before at a bus stop at a trailer park, and it had a steel trap and a chain it was dragging, and it was wounded. So long story short, I won't spoil that either, but I actually ended up going in the cave to dispatch that animal. It had to be dispatched anyway, and I kept it as my trophy because it was actually larger than what I had anticipated shooting. But then we go on to chapter 6, the thoroughfare of Wyoming, a lot of elk hunting. One of the things I'm proud of with the book is I've got 2 introduction letters, one from Ray Scott, the late Ray Scott, my dear friend. He wrote an introduction letter. He was the founder of the Bass Angler Sportsman Society and also the Whitetail Institute, and also an introduction letter from Bob Cobb, the first editor of Bassmaster Magazine and the first producer of Bassmaster TV. Anyway, the thoroughfare is full of elk hunting, and also have a local testimony in the beginning of the book from Eddie Edwards, the retired president of CommScope, and he confirms and tells a story about the 1,000-pound grizzly bear in our tent one night, and I won't spoil that either. That was a very interesting and exciting night. Chapter 7, The Last Frontier, that's my trips to Alaska. I was very fortunate and blessed to make 14 of those. Took some magnificent game, but also got to learn the culture of the Indians up there and became friends with a lot of people in the villages. And it was more than just hunting. In fact, I still have a relationship with one of the small schools up there that I try to help from time to time. And we go on to the fishing end of it. Chapter 8, 9, and 10, basically, and 11 are basically about bass fishing and fishing tournaments as a very young man. I was, like I said earlier, I was the first person to earn a check in a BASS event in 1968 at age 15. At age 15, 16, and 17, there were only 4 tournaments that I could fish because of the geography and because of being in high school. And back then, there were no high school fishing teams. There were no college fishing teams. There were no mentors. I was my own mentor along with a few older gentlemen. But anyway, in the summer of 1970, the plan was that after finishing in the money 3 of those 4 tournaments, 2 top 10s, as a matter of fact, the plan was my dad was going to go to Lake Sam Rayburn in September, and I was going to go to college. Well, we went to Sam Rayburn to practice in August, and we caught a ton of fish and pre-fishing. And I came home and told my mom that I wasn't going to go to college. I was going to fish for a living. And that was not the right thing for me to say at the wrong time. They owned my car. They owned my boat. And needless to say, I went to college, and Dad went on to Sam Rayburn and finished second to Bill Dance. And the following summer, I won the draft lottery. I was number 1, December the 4th, 1952, earned the first draft priority. So that pretty well put a nail in my bass fishing coffin. I guess you could say I retired from professional fishing at age 17. But then we go on to La Casa de los Cinco Amigos. That's chapter 13. That's an adventure in itself. It could be a book in itself. That's a fishing club that Ray Scott started. There were only 5 of us in the club. It was Ray Scott and Forrest Wood and Bob Cobb, Bill Schrader, and myself. We been going to Mexico since the 1970s. Actually started his club in 1992, and it was quite an experience. It's something I look back on. It's hard to believe that it was happening at the time. But then we go on to 14, which is Canadian smallmouth fishing. That Peru speaks for itself. It's a very colorful people. Then I'll jump to the saltwater fishing. That actually was chapter 12, but that story, it's multifaceted. There's multiple trips, but one trip in particular, we hooked a 780-pound marlin at 2:20 in the afternoon. It jumped twice and tail wrapped the second time. Just so happened a boat that we were 50 miles offshore, a boat dropped off their mate to help us because our captain knew, and he's a friend of mine, Sam Stokes. He knew we had our hands full because the second time the fish jumped, the leader tail wrapped. So we had a 800-pound marlin at the time, tail wrapped by the tail. And long story short, that fish died, and we landed it the next morning at 6:10. That fight went on for 15 hours and covered 50 miles in reverse all night during 3 thunderstorms. Anyway, we go on then to close out chapter 16 is fundraising with all my rowdy friends, which that involved some people like Ray Scott and also Willie Nelson and Charlie Daniels and Travis Tritt and Joe D. Messina, Kenny Rogers. It's a pretty colorful chapter in itself. And then the Pass It On chapter is about talking about me passing on things to my children and grandchildren. And lastly, I've got a chapter 18, which closed the book out. I wrote in what I thought was going to be memory of my best dog, Doc, but he has surprised us all, and he's still with me. In fact, he's out in the car waiting on me for a roast beef sandwich.
Really resilient. I mean,
yes.
Yeah. You talked about your grandparents, but your father was a big influence on you as well, right?
Well, Dad's a bass fishing Hall of Famer. He was not into hunting at all. He was big time into fishing. I think he did some hunting as a very young man. And yes, I spent a lot of time with him on the water. Probably spent as much or more time with my grandfather, because Dad had to work for a living, obviously. And then Dad went on to fish the tournament circuit, and I went to work after I came back from basic training.
How did you match working and leading these expeditions? How did that work?
Richard, that's a really good question. We bought the business, the family business, myself and my 2 young brothers. I think it was in 1983 or 1984. And I ended up buying out one of my brothers along the way. And it was a 10-year leveraged buyout. And at the end of, and there was very little hunting and fishing during that 10-year period. I did some local fishing. I did some local hunting in Burke County, if you will. But towards the end of that buyout, we were getting ready to write the last check at the end of 10 years. And I told my wife, I said, we're going to have some money that we're not used to having at the end of every month, because we were writing some pretty significant checks for that business. And I said, I can do one of 3 things. We can either give ourselves a raise, or we can cut our costs to our customers, or we can hire 3 people to help me manage this thing. We can hire an engineer, which we did. We can hire a marketing guy, which we did. And we can hire an estimator, which we did. That was the money we had been spending buying the business. And I hired those 3 people, Ken Duty, may rest in peace, Don Daniels, and Darren Allen. And they would help me manage the business. And we grew the business from the time we bought it from 15 people to 200 people. And we added more management people. And as we did in the early 90s, I was able to get away some. And by the mid-90s, I was able to get away a lot. I could be gone for 2 weeks at a time, and that management team would keep things together. So that's when I began all these serious adventures, big adventures. And then finally, in the year, I think around 2000, I had quite a bit of free time on my hands. And once I had achieved my goals, it was my desire to help others achieve theirs.
So it just grew and grew over the years. Once you got control of the business or got it to a manageable position.
Well, I told a story earlier that I might have fished for a living had the cards been dealt just a little bit different. And I'll always wonder. I finished in the money 3 out of the 4 tournaments I fished by the time I was 17 years old, so I had some history there. But I wouldn't trade fishing for a living for the life that I lived, because by following the business route, it allowed me to chase other dreams, which far outweighed anything I could have accomplished just bass fishing.
Now, how did some of these celebrities find out about you? Is it word of mouth?
I guess word of mouth. For example, Kenny Rogers was in Charlotte playing at Carowinds at what they called the Palladium. That would have been probably the late 70s. It was back during his gambler days, that movie. And I stayed at the Holiday Inn when I would fish Lake Wiley, because you could back up to the outside rooms and charge your battery on your boat. And I became friends with the manager there. And when Kenny was in town at Carowinds, he was staying in a suite at the Holiday Inn. And he had asked the manager, I think he'd like to talk and meet some local bass fishermen, and we got introduced. Ray Scott opened so many doors for me. That was the founder of Bass and founder of the Whitetail Institute. I can't begin to tell you the people he exposed me to, which included sitting presidents, federal judges, just outdoor celebrities. I'll never forget sitting in a restaurant with him in New Orleans, and Bo Jackson came up to him and said, "Mr. Scott, can I have your autograph?" I was in a little cabin in a restaurant adjacent to a little cabin in Canada, and Bobby Knight, the basketball coach, came up to him and said, "Mr. Scott, can I have your autograph?" He went backstage with me when we had a fundraising party. I wanted to introduce him to Travis Tritt, and he stuck his hand out to Travis, and he said, "Travis, he said, I know who you are, Mr. Scott. I'm from South Georgia, and I'm a bass fisherman." So Ray opened all kinds of doors in over many, many different ways in many, many years.
Now, have you ever had a bad day fishing? I know you've had some adventures with various things, but have you ever had a bad day with any of that? That you rethought, do I want to do this?
Well, I've been in a boat wreck, which was pretty serious. A plane crash, which wasn't really serious, but we survived it okay. Could have been serious. And there's been events that the Marlin week, we rode 3 thunderstorms and all night long in reverse, and water splashing over the transom of the boat. And my wife and 2 brothers were my soon-to-be wife. She was my fiance at the time. It was her first fishing trip with me, and I thought she would never go back because the water was just a flying over the back of the boat, and everybody was sick. I was not sick, but the wife and 2 brothers were. But, all the bad in that night went away after the results.
Because you knew what you were going for. You knew what the final result could be. I mean, you might lose it, but in all likelihood, if you're going to work that hard, you're going to make sure you pull it in, right?
Well, at the time, and I believe that was 1982, at the time, that marlin would have weighed probably 850 pounds live. But by the time we got it in, it was bled out and dehydrated, and it weighed 780 anyway. And at the time, that was the 2nd or 3rd largest marlin that had been taken on the Atlantic coast. And at the time when we were fighting it, we didn't know if it weighed 800 pounds or if it weighed 1,100 pounds. And had it weighed 1,100 pounds, it would have been the largest marlin. And when you've got something out there and you've only seen it jump twice, and it looks like a Volkswagen minibus when it comes up out of the water, it keeps your adrenaline going.
For, what'd you say, 15 hours?
15 hours and 10 minutes.
Wow.
We started the fight 50 miles offshore. We chased the fish in reverse for, 60 miles actually. We chased the fish in reverse. We were 110 miles offshore, Sam Stokes said, when we finally got the fish in the boat.
Now, as I remember, there's also some cuisine talk in the book as well, right?
Well, outdoor cooking is something that I've always enjoyed. I learned to cook at a very young age for survival reasons. When I was 10, I had 3 younger siblings, and my mother was bedridden for a year with inoperable back surgery. They finally found someone that would operate on her a year later. And I learned to cook for my siblings and myself if I wanted to eat. And that cooking went to outdoors. I mean, when I was 11 and 12, we would find bird eggs and bird nests and fry them over the campfire, and one thing led to another. But the adventures I had with Ray Scott led to the majority of that outdoor cooking. A lot of people thought that he and I shared the desire to hunt and fish, and we did. But that wasn't what bonded us the way we bonded. It was the sense of adventure, exploring old Indian caves in Mexico, going to flea markets, going to old Indian villages, Mexican villages, and looking for their trash, which was our treasure, old bowls, that sort of thing. But cooking was a real passion that we shared over an open fire and also in an outdoor kitchen that we had. So, yes, in fact, I've begun a second book that is actually about a how-to for outdoor cooking.
Now, is that going to include recipes and everything?
It will include recipes, how-to. It'll have some griddle cooking. I do not use a grill. When you use a grill, you drop your flavor through the grates and you dry it out. I use a griddle. I use Dutch ovens, and I do some open fire roasting and also some in-ground stuff.
Now, you was talking about some of the places, other people's trash is your treasure, and you're discovering that. There's a lot of opportunity that you've had to see the world, really.
Yes, I have, and I think the greatest satisfaction that I get out of that is realizing that it helped my children understand that we have such a good life here in the United States of America. They got to see how the villagers live in Africa. And I mean, it's not that they're abused or anything, but they're just poor. They're just dirt poor, and they don't have the access to medical care like we do. They appreciate food. We went over there as hunters, and that's the only time they get meat. Fresh meat is when there's the hunters on the ranch. Those adventures were special for my kids to be able to learn that everybody doesn't have it as good as we do in the United States of America.
Now, you're mentioning a second book. Is that you're on your bucket list, or is there something else there too, something you haven't done that you want to do?
The second book, this book was Long Guns and Great Fishing Runs. That was designed primarily to preserve history for both my family and my friends, and actually some fishing history as well. I was on the ground floor of this bass movement, and I was. There's only 3 people living that fished the first tournament that I fished in 1968, and that's Bill Dance and Jimmy Houston and myself. So that was done for historic reasons, pass it on down to the family reasons, without any real goal of achieving any necessary plateaus with that book. But with the cooking book, I think there is a number of people out there that would like to learn to cook outdoors that don't know how. And I'm going to cram in almost 70 years of experience, not only in recipes, but I'm going to cross over domestic protein as well as wild protein. Most of my recipes you can use wild game or something you buy in the grocery store. And like I said, there'll be a lot of different prep techniques, and it'll be a how-to book filled with photographs. But I think that book may be more for a retail sale type book.
Okay, and that's not necessarily saying that you have to, pardon me for putting it away, kill it before you grill it. I mean, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be a hunter to be able to utilize these recipes.
You can use wild shrimp you catch yourself, or you can go to Harris Teeter and pick up the shrimp. You can use beef, or you can use elk roast. All the recipes will be interchangeable.
Now, this book has been out for a while. How's it going with reception of it? What kind of reception have you received from it?
Well, Richard, I've sold some books. I think y'all sold some books.
We have.
I'm not a knowledgeable person when it comes to that. I just set up last week the first dealer that Outdoor Supply in Hickory, Charlie Mowgray. He's carrying the book now. He has it for sale. Of course, you can buy it. RedhawkPublications.com.
If Robert were here, he'd want me to say RedhawkPublications.com.
RedhawkPublications.com. Or if you want to go pick one up, you can pick it up at Outdoor Supply in North Hickory. I also will be doing some promotions with Charlie and Outdoor Supply down the road when he lets me know when he wants to do it.
And what's your sense of the health of both fishing and hunting these days? Is it a growing sport? How does it look out there?
You know, that's kind of a double-edged sword, but I will say this. I witnessed the restoration of the wild turkey in western North Carolina. I saw it. I was there when the first 7 successfully were released. There had been some released in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. But in 1962, I saw the first, well, actually there were 8. 7 survived. My grandfather was very instrumental in that. And now we have a wild turkey population that was extinct in 1900 that is at record numbers. The white-tailed deer are at record numbers. They were almost extinct. I was part of a group that reintroduced elk to western North Carolina. I helped Richard Childress and some other folks do that about 20 years ago. They have a healthy herd now. Bass fishing was seriously on its decline until Ray Scott came along. And Ray promoted a program called Don't Kill Your Catch. The first tournaments we fished, we kept everything. We didn't know any better. We kept everything, and he gave away the fish to orphanages by the boatloads full of them. But in 1970, he came up with Don't Kill Your Catch. If you brought in a fish that was dead, you were penalized for it. You had to keep it alive. So that led to aerated live wells and releasing 98% of the fish at the end of the tournament. So, you know, and I think that saltwater has taken a beating, but I believe that catch and release is being promoted. And Ray started catch and release before it was cool. And I think other species and other sportsmen are catching on to that. And for that reason, I think that the future of the game and the fish is bright, with one exception, and that is we are developing this country. We're losing their habitat. So I think it's very critical, and thank goodness we had some forefathers that had sense enough to put back the national forest and the parks and that sort of thing. So overall, yes, I think things are on the upswing.
Okay, but your career has been pretty much you've seen it go from killing everything you catch to that whole catch and release idea. I mean, over the stretch of it.
Well, I was guilty of keeping all the fish. You'll see in the book, there's lots of pictures in the 60s and even early 70s of bring them in, put them on a stringer, pose for a photograph, shoot the deer. Once I matured, I know Sharon one time said, if you don't shoot something, I'm not going to believe you're going hunting, because I would go sometimes 3 or 4 years without pulling the trigger because I had set my standards higher each year. And I think more and more people have adapted that just don't shoot everything that moves. Just be selective. And when we do shoot it, I've had one rule, and it started with my grandmother when I was 4 years old. If you shoot it, you don't waste it. You either eat it or you give it to somebody that needs it. So I believe in that as well. I don't believe of course, I don't hunt anymore. I gave that up. I just go in the woods with my kids and grandkids. But I've always believed and was always taught that if you harvest an animal, make sure it goes to good use.
Does that include taxidermy?
I'm sorry, ask that again.
Does that include having them stuffed and putting up on the wall and that sort of thing?
Well, the only thing when you go to a taxidermist that is still real, or for example, a white-tailed deer, is the skin and the antlers. Everything else is a fiberglass mold. Same with a bear. The only thing with a bear, there's a bear on the back of my book cover, I believe it is, that was estimated at about 1,900 pounds. And his skull and hide weighed 205 pounds. I know because I had to pack it out on my back, and we weighed it later. So when you harvest something, you use the meat, but then you can still go to the taxidermist, and just as long as you've got the hide and the horns.
Gotcha. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to sit down, and you said you don't really hunt anymore.
No, I'll give just a tease as to what happened. We were on an African safari. We had hunted for this pride of lions for 19 days and nights. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. We found them. My wife and 2 daughters, LJ and Emily and Sharon, were on the back of the truck with 2 of the trackers. And we found the lions. We got out. The professional hunter We walked through the pride lines. We had lines everywhere. I mean, it was really an eerie feeling situation. But there was the big male ahead, probably 40 yards. He put up the shooting sticks, and I put my rifle on the shooting sticks. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw two tiny cubs, just weeks old. And I knew from my experience that if I shot the male, that those two cubs were doomed because the next male would kill them. So I took the safety off, handed the gun to the tracker in the back of the truck. The professional hunter was not happy with me at all. I said to my wife and daughters, catch and release at its finest. I said, let's go home. And I don't know, but something came over me that day. And to this day, now if I get hungry, I will go in the woods and harvest something. But so far, I haven't had to do that.
What about fishing? Do you do much fishing these days?
Not a lot. I fish up on Lake James some. You know, we made 105 trips to Mexico. We had a house down there called La Casa de los Cinco Amigos. And we had some mighty fine trips and caught lots of fish, had lots of fun. And it's kind of hard to get excited to fish local lakes around here after being in a paradise like that. But I go some. I go with my son and granddaughters to opening youth day for trout fishing the first Saturday in June each year, and trout fish a little bit and bass fish a little bit on Lake James. But we were sitting on a porch one time in Mexico, and the sun had come up and it was shining on the mountains. We at the base of an 8,000-foot mountain, and it was about 9 o'clock, and I was with Forrest Wood and Ray Scott, and Forrest said, I can't believe the sun's up and we're sitting up here instead of down there on the water. And Ray said, I don't think we're as mad at them as we used to be. I've kind of adopted that theory too.
I see what you're saying, yeah. Well, Rhodney Honeycutt, thank you so much for doing the book, number one, to preserve all that, but also for all you've done in terms of conservation and kind of creating helping my understanding of what it means to be a hunter and a fisherman and all those things.
Well, I would say thank you as well. I've enjoyed it, but I'll close with one statement. If it were not for hunters and fishermen, wildlife and fishing would not be what it is today. Hunters and fishermen, through their investments, allow the species to be managed.
And that's a necessity.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you for being on RedPubPod. I only have one more thing to ask. Can you say the name of the show? RedPubPod?
RedPod?
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod. Did I get it?
That got it. That got it very good. Thank you. And thank you for being with us. And thank you for your work with Redhawk Publications. We look forward to the next one.
Thank you, sir.
You've been listening to
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.
A podcast. RedPubPod from Redhawk Publications. RedPubPod.
RedPubPod. RedPubPod.